Welcome everyone to this board meeting for the first of the year. I think the apologies we have. Sophie will be joining us in I think about 20 minutes online. Rachel Claire Evans is unfortunately sick today, and so has tendered her apologies as well. But Sally, you're speaking to her item, I believe. Do we have any other apologies? I don't think so. And we have our Antipodean representative as well on screen. Welcome. What time in the day is it for you at the moment over there?
It's 6 o'clock in the evening.
Gosh, so there you go. End of the day for you, beginning of the day for us. Any declarations of interest that aren't already registered or are particularly pertaining to items on the agenda? No. I just wanted to start off today, perhaps with just us all, perhaps around the table, very briefly thinking about how we are feeling about the work of Oxleas, the NHS, what we're doing in the new year. Now, we've all had some time off over Christmas, some opportunities over Christmas and the new year to perhaps reflect on things. Just how we are about that going forward. And I'll admit to a bit of personally slightly almost confused feelings. There's a bit of everything that's going on at the moment where it seems fairly chaotic out there. We hear of the fires in Los Angeles, that dreadful murder in Woolwich recently. All of these things, and if we're also going to be frank, messages coming out from the government that about health that are mixed, that are sometimes difficult to understand what's going on. And yet there was something else that when I came in here this morning, and I was mentioning it to Sally when I came in here this morning, actually the work goes on. It just felt very normal walking into Queen Mary and talking to people in other trusts and talking to my wife who works in trusts. There's a bit of it which means the normal work is going on, and there's something about maintaining that focus on actually what we do well. But also I think that there are some opportunities. I really do feel there's some opportunities here. Some of the conversations I've been having mean that this flux that's going on at the moment does give us some chances to do things that we want to do. And so I'm sort of in this mixed feeling of this real confusion going on over here, but actually we've got a direction to go to. I'm feeling quite confident in a way about our direction, while it's going to be quite tough in the next little while. Ife, do you have any thoughts?
I think you've captured it quite well. For me, it's mixed in the sense that one thinks about the pressures that the NHS is under and we're also under, and then you hear of everything else happening in the world, or the government's announcement on Monday just gone. I think I came into the new year, obviously with a new notebook. First few pages, finances is what I outlined in there on the meetings I had last week with colleagues. Was really thinking about 25, 26. What do we need to do? How do we need to do things differently to enable us to navigate the years ahead? But you're right. We were talking on Tuesday. We did well at the weekend, and suddenly we had reports of more pressures in ED. Lots of people needing beds. And that's the NHS. But I think what's most important is, and I say this to people, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And what I personally look for are the challenges that make it worthwhile getting up in the morning to say, right, we've got to try and tackle this. And I'm pretty sure that most of us will say that's what keeps us going.
Just to follow on from what Ife has said, I think this time of year you can anticipate that things are going to be quite challenging operationally in the wider system. As Ife has said, it was after a bit of a lull in terms of pressure on mental health beds. Those pressures came back at the beginning of the week. But what was interesting was we sorted them out. So within a day, things were much better again. And there's a real sense that we have structures and kind of systems in place to learn at the time what we could do better. So I think, I take a lot of positivity from that. I think there's real clarity for all of the directorates about their individual challenges, and I'm certainly feeling after a break over Christmas, renewed sense of energy to address some of these things. So, yeah.
I mean, I think from my perspective, it just feels like what happens in the NHS. It's, another day, another problem, and people just get their heads down and get on with it, which I think is really positive. And like Ian says, there are always problems, but people, focus on addressing them. We work very well, I think, as an organisation amongst ourselves and with others in partnership to do that. So that's a really positive thing. And obviously, looking forward from my perspective, I have a slightly different horizon ahead of me than some others. But some it makes me very sad not to think that in some ways I won't be part of that. So.
Yeah, just to continue the theme of it's a mixed picture. I think for me, particularly with an eye on culture, I look around at 2025 and I look at the wider world and I feel a bit worried about how people are able to communicate across differences and how all that works. But that contrasts with what we're doing within Oxleas, which to me actually fills me with energy about how we're working with culture and the kind of things that we're doing. And I suppose so I'm enthusiastic about Oxleas. I think the rest of the world should follow us a bit, really.
Similar to others, I feel mixed. I suppose personally, I feel great. I love this time of the year. I love the sort of feeling of a new start. So I feel energized and excited. But I also feel apprehensive about the environment in which we are operating. It seems, not just it just seems that sort of the social fabric, there's a lot of anger against public services and social services and those kind of ties that keep us going. That seems very fragile right now. And there's a lot of uncertainty in that space, kind of politically, socially. And so because we are subject to so many forces beyond us, I feel kind of apprehensive about what might be coming. So we'll see.
Morning all. Mine sort of focus on Oxleas per se is that although they've got short-term pressures, I'm quite confident in the Oxleas team and the exec team to actually handle the short-term pressures. And also medium-term, I think we're quite confident going into this year that we've got everything on track in terms of what we tend to do this year. My only trepidation is around maybe the longer-term financial picture for the country, with the pressures on borrowing, which means that we're probably likely to have cuts coming through in the summer, and how those cuts may in the long term affect us going forward.
Thank you. I mean, I'd agree with what everyone else has said around the external environment, but certainly from an Oxleas perspective, I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of how technology can assist us going forwards. Iffy and I have been talking about the NHS app and the increased focus in elective care and using the NHS app as a one point of contact for patients and how we can replicate that in secondary care. I think, some of the technology we've been talking about in terms of AVT, so ambient voice technology, could be transformational in the organisation in terms of the way that we provide patient care and free up clinicians' time to spend more time with patients. But that is set against the cultural challenge that I think we will have in helping our clinicians adopt that technology and getting the most out of it. But I think there's lots of opportunities in the years ahead.
Thank you. So I'm with Alison in that I think there are some real opportunities for Oxleas in the next few years, and I think we're in a good position to grasp them. In terms of the worrying picture, I can't help thinking back to the last board meeting that we had before COVID. And we were quite content at the time. We thought there was going to be a bit of a flu outbreak, but we didn't anticipate the pandemic. And despite the fact that we didn't wholly anticipate it, we dealt with it really well. And I think that that's very encouraging. It's a sign of resilience and the fact that whilst as humans we naturally worry about what's coming over the horizon, when it eventually arrives, we deal with it fairly well. And you asked about what we've been thinking about over Christmas. And so I did want to bring one thing forward. I had a lovely letter from an old colleague who used to work at Health Education England, who had looked me up on LinkedIn, I think, and found that I was with Oxleas. And his son is one of our service users. He has Down syndrome, and he took the opportunity to write to me and say what brilliant service we provide, which is fabulous when you chair a quality committee, because you're never quite sure whether the data that you get is lived out on the ground. But he sent me quite a long message that I've shared with the team. But at the end, he said the whole learning disability team at St Mary's is so friendly and welcoming, and the vibe when you visit is just so wholesome in its welcome and interactions with clients and carers. And I think that kind of information about Oxleas really keeps me going.
Jane, you're next in the circle in this room.
Thank you. I agree with everybody, but I've been really inspired over the last few weeks. I've been having lots of conversations with people, and people have been sharing with me some of their ambitions and hopes for the future. The children's community teams had a lovely away day recently, and the clinicians came up with some wonderful things that they wanted to really focus on over the next few years. And obviously investing in our children and young people is going to be a priority for us. But they were talking about some of the things that they wanted to do in terms of research around oncology in children and asthma and partnership working. And it was incredibly inspiring that some of these nurses had only been qualified a few years. Some of them were just embarking on their journeys as apprenticeships. And within a room of nurses, there were over sort of 700 years of nursing there. So it was just incredibly inspiring that at the end of the day, we have this wonderful workforce that have great ideas that are going to keep on innovating and developing and pushing us forward.
Thank you.
James sort of stole my thunder. Do you have to press that? That's what I was going to say actually about I feel really proud actually of our nursing workforce and the energy and the ideas and the compassionate care that is provided all over Christmas and the New Year. Things have been really busy, and actually our nurses and our teams have gone out of their way to really provide the best care they can in really difficult circumstances. And actually in Oxleas, we've really reduced our nursing vacancy rates. And so in 2025, looking forward to much more innovation and creativity and how we can really raise the profile of nurses and boost into professional working.
By the time you get to this side of the table, everybody has said everything. So I suppose I started the year with renewed energy. I'm really looking forward to the work that we're going to do in the community and the shift from hospital to community. I'm looking forward to the work and the plans we've got in our quality team. And I think one thing that is concerning me is our workforce. And from my point of view, at least the medical workforce do feel very tired. That comes across when I have conversations with them. But I'm hoping to sort of do some work around that. So I am looking forward to the year. But I think one thing that I've also reflected on is that there have been bereavements for people, and people have got things going on in their lives outside work, and we just need to be aware of that and make sure we're taking that into consideration, which I personally will be.
As Abby said, agree with a lot of that. I think absolutely echo with Neil on the cultural stuff. I think we're really pushing on with the cultural stuff. Even, looking at what we've done in terms of making the strategy real to teams. And I like the fact that, each directorate can talk about how they fit into the strategy. I think that's really important. And the way we're going about communicating that is really good. I also think everyone's feeling very optimistic, aren't they? I think there are some good green shoots of system working to improve things as well. So I saw in Iffy's report about the new partnership work to tackle health inequalities, and that seems to echo the work that was done in London on HIV testing and things like that, where you actually go out to all sorts of quite small groups and accessing different parts of the community. I know it's early stages and these things are always complex, but that's good. And also the neighbourhood stuff that Ian talked about at the last away day. it's all really complex, but it feels like there's opportunities to move things in the right direction, which I think is really positive.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Joe. It's probably a year of opportunity. I mean, for me as a board member, I have three things in mind: engaging and supporting staff and ensuring that we have a strong culture, ensuring that we deliver excellent care to each and every patient, and ensuring that we use the money as well as possible. And on top of that, obviously, overseeing the risks and dealing with risks and problems and challenges as they happen. There's only so much we can do as an organization, but actually there's a huge amount we can do. So let's concentrate on what we can do and let's do it well, I guess, is my idea.
So I think there's probably two, I'm going to take it as two reflections. Personal, and I think it is really picking up that theme that we talked about just what's going on in the world. I think I've thought about that a lot over the Christmas break, some of the conflicts, some of all of those aspects, to a point that when you come back to work, there is something about saying there is an island, I would say, that is Oxleas, that where we more or less do have a direction of travel. But picking up the financial theme, I think those interactions with other organisations that are financially constrained is going to be one of the issues that we're going to have to work through in terms of some of the system working, because we're already hearing people talking about withdrawing funding across a variety of things that we're going to have to deal with that challenge. So as well as our own journey on financial sustainability and the transformation that we need to make, we're going to have to keep in mind that context from other areas and the fact that the ask may become more or differentiated and that some of those relationships may become a little bit more strained as we approach the rest of this financial year.
Thanks. Well, this time of year, I'm always planning, I guess, personally, but also work-wise. And I think it is that balancing the longer-term aims and the short-term needs. So I think our strategy is quite a good way of helping us to keep looking out and up. Whereas we know we're going to need to focus on the day-to-day things, and that kind of looks inward. But I think making sure that we keep getting our head up and looking out will be important.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that one. And really interesting hearing everybody around the table, because there's some really common themes there. There's a confidence actually about our ability to deal with the short-term challenges. Not that it will be easy, but in actual fact, the day-to-day stuff we know how to deal with. It's hard work, but we know how to do that, and we're doing that well. And therefore, it is around actually building for that long-term in terms of our relationships, in terms of making sure we stay in the financial position that we can do what we want to do. And we'll be touching on some of that in part 2 of the meeting, in the strategy and making that strategy real. And again, we'll be touching on that in the beginning of the meeting. So thank you for that, everyone. And it's really interesting actually seeing that while everybody was coming at it from different directions, there was a lot of commonality in what people here were thinking. So thank you. Okay, on to the official business then. First of all, minutes of the last meeting. Are people first of all happy that this is a accurate record of it? I found a double full stop which I'll feed back, but that's just to show off that I've actually read it. In terms of, so I've got to scroll down now. In terms of the matters arising, I can't find them now, but one of the matters arising was due in the future, and the other one we're waiting for some guidance from NHS from. So so they're both pending, but I think pending for the right reasons. If everyone's happy, then Neil, can I turn to you for the service user and carer involvement focus? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in this section, we like to use this part of the meeting to look at how we're using lived experience within the Trust. Today's focus is on the relationship between involvement and improvement. So at our monthly meetings, we bring together lots of different aspects of the Trust, but one of the key groups that we bring together is the QI and quality management and the involvement, because we want to look at how we're using lived experience within QI projects across the Trust. Now, obviously, not all QI projects need lived experience. We're not saying that, but where they relate to patient outcomes, actually you get much better results if you involve lived experience and use a co-production approach. So we've been monitoring that. The quality management is obviously a very broad set of practices, and the aspect that we're focusing on today is within prisons and forensics. Prisons and forensics has actually a number of very significant challenges to involvement, but also where you can do involvement and QI together, you can get some amazing results. So I'm really pleased that Liv Ellis is here to talk about some of the work that she's done, and we've made a film. I'm just going to make a side note about the film. The film, this might have been in my reflections about 2025. So to anonymize service users who are in our prisons, obviously we can't show people's faces and names, but we've used AI bots. So what you're going to see is an AI bots talking the real words of service users. But poor Liv was off for 1 day, I think, and herself got replaced by an AI bot. So perhaps I could have included that in my reflections of 25 as fears. We brought her back to prove that, to reverse that trend. So I'm going to show the film, but the introduction person is you, isn't it? It's just you couldn't do that film on that day. Yeah, sure. But everything is said by service users in our forensics and prison services is their words. But so I'll show the film.
Involvement within improvement initiatives is ever growing within our patient population. Today's video will focus on involvement within our Forensics and Offender Healthcare Directorate. Historically, involvement and collaboration has been difficult within these services due to service restrictions, environment, and perspectives. Over the last year, the quality team have strived to create more opportunities for involvement within projects, service improvements, and feedback. This has been done through quality improvement training, focusing on culture and attitudes and one-to-one work with teams to recognise the positive impact patients can have on improvement. The feedback within this video has been anonymised. You will hear from patients across the Forensics Directorate and HMP Channings Wood, who have recently or are currently undertaking improvement initiatives with our healthcare teams. Within forensic inpatient teams, a new patient welcome pack has been designed to ensure patients and families receive appropriate information on admission. This was co-designed by patients and staff from the outset. HMP Channings Wood have launched a co-production project aiming to increase the involvement of patients in the creation and running of psychological therapy groups to better support other patients through their time with the mental health team. So we asked patients a series of questions about their involvement within these projects, and here are some of their responses. Why did you want to get involved with the improvement project?
To help others and see them get better, and by doing that to also help myself.
I believe strongly in the importance of all people having their voices heard. In addition, co-production has benefits I've witnessed firsthand, including reducing workload in a stretched health service, innovations in support and better results, especially around mental health.
How does being on the project benefit you and other patients?
Sharing experiences helps you learn more about yourself.
For myself, it helps to contribute to my sense of purpose and identity to be able to use my experiences to help others. For others, I've seen it build up confidence, esteem, and engagement.
We get what we need or want through working together with the staff.
The patients get to have a voice, which is important.
Why do you think it's important to have patients on the project team?
Patients can reach and engage with some who wouldn't normally reach out.
Without patience, it would be like trying to put out a fire when you don't know where it is. Patients have experience of how the service actually feels to use, and so are usually best placed to spot strengths and weaknesses.
It's nice to be asked your opinion on everyday stuff, so it can improve.
Have there been any struggles or challenges?
It was a challenge to engage at first, but this gets better with time and support from the team.
Being recognised as an individual and trying to get experiences and projects accepted by HMPPS.
Do you have any advice you could give to other patients wanting to be involved?
Give it a try, and be honest. It will help build your confidence. Even if you just spend the first session quietly drinking coffee, it's worth it.
Be open to all opinions and focus on not just what might be challenging for you, but also for others across the service, staff and patients included.
It's good when you see changes happen because of your feedback, and it helps others too.
Do you have any advice you could give to staff on how to get patients involved?
Being positive in attitude about helping individuals to engage with the project, to being about a cultural and behavioural change towards each other.
Asking community meetings. Conversing as you would to anyone else, getting away from the labels of patient and staff, helps build up rapport, trust and cooperation. In addition, be honest about what is realistic or likely, and if you don't know, say you don't know.
As we have heard from the feedback, patient involvement is invaluable within improvement initiatives. It not only makes patients and families feel heard, but ensures more sustainable change. The quality team are working closely with the involved team to strengthen the bond between involvement and improvement, following the Nothing About Us Without Us initiative. This video aims to help to promote the importance of involvement in any improvements made to services and recognise the positive impact it can have on staff, patients and families.
So I think it's a really interesting film. I think the phrase that really stands out for me is if you don't involve patients, it's like trying to put out a fire where you don't know where they are. I mean, I think that's a quotable line, isn't it? But I was thinking of Jim and my visits to the prisons and seeing how this comes to life and what that means for someone receiving healthcare in prisons. But that said, and you have some basic information about the levels of co-production and patient involvement happening within QI in the pack. I'm very happy to take questions, and Liv is obviously here to answer some of the specifics.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Jim.
Thanks, Neil. Just a quick question for my knowledge. IHI score, what is it and how do you calculate it?
So the IHI score is a score which measures how the project is progressing. So it starts from 0.5, which is intent to participate. So if we get, word of someone wanting to do an improvement project but not starting it yet, and then it moves up by 0.5 each time to, say, 3.0, which is when they've made an improvement, goes all the way up to 5.0, which is significant sustained improvement. So it helps us move up further throughout and see where we've kind of made the improvements. And we kind of consider above 3.5 to be a really good sustained project, because some areas will need further development than others.
Joe?
Just a couple of comments from me. Firstly, the video, I think it works better that you're a bot because there's a certain equality between the patients and yourself. So I know that wasn't the plan, but I think it works well. In terms of Channings Wood, how much involvement did you need from the prison itself, and how difficult was that to achieve?
So far, we haven't needed a huge amount of input because it's mainly healthcare based, but we are moving towards getting more involvement from some of the specialist areas within the prison. Channings Wood has a specialist area where there's patients who work with some specially trained officers around improvements and things like that as well. So they're coming on board with the project, and it's mainly around getting involved with making sure patients are able to attend appointments, able to come to the groups, around like the unlocking and things like that as well. So it's with the project, it's mainly getting support from officers that they're going to be able to accommodate to bring patients and make sure that those issues aren't arising a lot of the time. But it depends on the project. The Channings Wood project is hugely healthcare based, but some projects, like we have one in Rochester at the moment about reducing DNAs, did not attend, for patients in primary care, and that's going to heavily involve the prison because of the movement and making sure that we have safe waiting areas and things like that if more patients are coming up at the same time.
Thanks for the video. It was interesting. I can't wait to learn how to do that. So one of the quotes from one of the prisoners was about just developing a rapport and speaking to someone as you would a normal conversation, and just sort of removing the hierarchy or the power dynamic. How have staff felt about that, especially in a kind of a custodial kind of service?
I think that was a really important question, and the project down in Channings Wood is the one which is really trying to change that rapport with patients. So at Channings Wood and some of the other southwest prisons, we have patient engagement coordinators or patient engagement leads, which differs from the prisons up here, and it's their kind of main job to build the rapport with patients, and then linking with staff and showing the positive impacts that this can have. So a lot of the patient engagement leads work very closely with not just the staff, but the officers and the patients all together. And it helps kind of get to know patients a lot more and see what they're interested in, and able to signpost them to jobs like healthcare reps and reps for different therapy groups and things like that. So it helps bring together what the patients want as well as the way that staff feel. Staff have been apprehensive. Some staff have been apprehensive about the co-production project, and I think that happens a lot throughout not just the prisons, but any service a lot of the time, especially when we're involving patients in things like therapy groups. I think a lot of the time we were thinking about the patient's well-being if they're chairing or co-facilitating groups like that. But then we have to remember that these patients have been through the groups themselves, so they know how it feels. And I think that's kind of where the apprehension was lying in the first place. But we've done a lot more research around it, and that's made a lot of the staff more comfortable about the benefits of co-producing groups. And that's really helped as well.
Thank you. I was really interested to see this presentation, Olivia, and thank you for your work on this. The question that I had was around the outstanding sustainable improvement projects that we've managed to achieve. Can you just give us a little bit of a flavour of those improvement projects and what the type of patient involvement in those was?
Yeah, of course. So the one that you saw on the screen about the patient welcome packs, that one has only recently finished, but it has had quite a high score. I don't think it has had 5.0 yet because it's only quite recently finished, but it's definitely up to 4.5 on the scale for now. I think the main involvement that we've had, and we have got a project poster on this one as well, which I can share if you'd like. So we had involvement from the outset around why is the current pack not working, and that was around each different ward had different information that was being provided. So when patients were moving from ward to ward, they had completely different information about the Bracton Centre, for example, which was sometimes contradicting each other. So first of all, it was around sort of focus groups to see what is the main real issue and getting down to the root cause of it. And then when we started to develop it, we had 3 patients from across varying wards be on the design group. So they helped us to create the actual content and the design and the layout of the new booklets. It also then went to the Can You Understand It team, and that helped us make sure that it was going to be accessible for all patients. And it was also taken to user forum. So I think having the patients on the design group throughout, we were able to make as many changes as we could, and the use of the use of taking it to user forum helped us understand what the patients in the Bracton themselves really thought about it. And there was a lot of multidisciplinary staff on that as well, including sort of the recovery college as well. So that was really helpful.
So yes, Sally's just pointed out that this is part of the New Year's resolutions, that actually we should interrupt meetings to have exercise for our well-being. I also think some of us have probably reflected that there's probably a little bit of learning there in terms of us being clearer on what we ought to be doing in these various things when we are not visitors, but sort of in a place that's not familiar to us. And so that's something that I think we need to think about, so we know exactly what we're meant to do. But welcome back, everybody. Somebody else was pointing out to me that it's only under my chairmanship that meetings get disrupted by anything. So I'll do my best not to take that personally. Okay, we were in the middle of a really important conversation about service user and carer involvement focus. I think we'd finished answering the questions I've been asked, but are there any other questions? I've got one, or got two, and I suppose one is a question, the other is a comment. The question is actually, what do we learn about, can we learn about from this work about the way in which we involve our staff also in change programs? Because one of the things I'm aware of is that we keep talking about how we want both our people who use our services, but also our frontline staff to be involved in change programs. And I wonder whether there's some learning there. And the other one is a comment, and that is really interesting seeing the video and the use of AI bots. I think really good. I'm totally in favour of it. I just wonder whether we need to think through how we label or talk about these things. Maybe we've already done this in an era where people are thinking about fake news and things like that. How is it that we position these if we make these things public? And that's probably going to be a moving feast as as we evolve, but that's just something that we maybe need to think about so that we don't, we just need to think about that. So, Neil.
Yeah, happy to. I think in terms of the latter question, I think we'll look to comms for that, so that's the first time I've seen an AI film, so I'm probably not best placed to comment on that. In terms of preparing staff, so this is one of the reasons when we set up Involved that we had our PPL leads, which are public participation leads, as patient participation leads. The truth is they're also staff participation leads as well, bridge builders. So in our work with social inclusion and community, we used to have to do a lot of work preparing the patient to be ready to join the community group, but we'd have to prepare the community group as well to accommodate the patient. I think it's the same with staff. The staff have to shift around quite a lot of their working practice to accommodate this. I mean, I think we've learned a lot about our own committees as well, that there's a different pace sometimes this work, but it's worth it. So that's always been in our thinking to prepare staff. And I think what your work showed, Liv, with the prisons is, as Abby was saying, there's two staff. There's healthcare staff, and then there's staff in the institution as well. And I think there are different levels of preparation there. I always see it as a bridge between two land masses. You've got to work on both sides to build the bridge.
I think I'm also thinking about how do we engage staff in their not only to engage in this process, but also to bring their expertise to it as well.
That's absolutely part of the process. I think very often staff have anxieties about what can I say about what I know, or even my own lived experience. How do I want to contribute that? So we do a lot of work to help people to do that, but keep it task focused, and so it's a big shift. I think our staff are really willing. They're very busy, and that's where you need the sort of go-between people that to kind of just build that. And I think last time when we showed our peer engagement project, we showed that because we were able to fund through the NHS England money a member of staff to kind of do that, everything worked better because the staff were willing. They just needed some sort of help to do that.
Just talk about from a QI perspective in terms of staff engagement as well. A lot of the times when we're looking at QI projects, we think about who the end user is. So it's not necessarily who, it might not be a service user, the end user might be a staff. And I think whenever we look at that, it's part of our initiation of our projects to think about who the end user is. And then when we come up with our project teams, we have to make sure that the most appropriate end users are also there as the experts. Similar to if the end user was a patient, the patient would be on board as the expert with lived experience. And I think around sort of preparing staff to engage not only with QI projects, but with co-production as well, one of the things that we try to do is have a look at people's hopes and concerns and kind of break down those barriers at the very start of the projects so that staff know what to expect when engaging with patients, but also when engaging with QI, so that we can kind of weigh up what people's hopes are and what we're going to be getting out of the project, but also if there are any concerns, how we can actually support our team can support the project team to break down those barriers.
Thank you, Liv. That's so helpful. So will you pick up the bit about the use of bots, which I think is a good thing? It's just I think we need to think heavily labour. Welcome, Nina. You probably missed less. I know you've had a dreadful way in, but you've missed less than you thought you've missed because we had to evacuate you to a fire alarm. So we're all safe now. So we're only on about to start item 5, just to orientate you. Any other points or questions for Neil and Liv? Really important and helpful in all sorts of ways. And thank you for appearing in 2 forms as well. That's great. Thank you. Okay, can we move on? Iffy, the Board Assurance Framework update.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So not a great deal has changed since we reviewed this in detail in November. We still have 12 risks, 4 of them significant, 5 high, 2 moderate, 1 low. And as you see from the paper, there's been just 1 movement, which is that the revenue and capital risk has been reduced from moderate to low. And then we've got a few other changes with the wordings and mitigations for 3 other risks. So nothing significant really to make the board aware of.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Iffy? Jim?
Thanks, Iffy. Just a comment that came up at Business and Infrastructure, and more of a philosophical question, really. In terms of the risks, I presume these all are in-year risks, but in terms of CIP, obviously in year we're quite confident, but over multiple years, the CIP risk could be quite significant. And so, just a philosophical question about our risks and how we deal with multi-year risks.
I come in on that. So actually there is a risk on the risk register, which is the sustainability risk. And that's the one that effectively picks up the year-on-year recurrent CIP and our ability to be able to meet our recurrent gap between all of our budgeted posts and then what the expenditure is looking like. So that not ongoing recurrent risk, which I think is the longer sustainability risk, is already on the BAF. It's a risk rated significant and it picks up that CIP risk.
But in general, how do we deal with long-term multi-year risks? CIP is just one example. We have other types of examples. And how do we is it within sustainability?
It's within that sustainability. So if you look at it, it's broken down across all of the areas and also has a bit of a feature on capital as well, because it's picking up all of those longer term sustainability risks that we've got.
Just to comment, as new joiner and chair of ARAC, I had a good session with Sue back shortly before Christmas, I believe, to go through the processes and procedures behind the BAF, and I'm very happy with what I heard. One thing I wanted to look at is the operational risk register and the top risks in that register, which is a bottom-up review of risk to ensure that the committee doesn't miss anything in terms of the top operating risks escalated by the business, so to speak. So trying to reconcile effectively the top-down approach of the BAF with the higher rated risks coming back from the operations. And so I think we'll look at that at the next ARAC committee.
I did wonder, and I'm not sure whether Sally, it's you or Sue I need to look to, whether we had a discussion quite a while ago about revising the way we view our risks on the BAF to be more in-year than across several years. And this was when we reviewed the longevity of risks on the BAF. I can't quite remember now, but am I mistaken?
It was about not having the same risk on there forever. So it's making sure that whilst there may be long-term risks, that we actually make sure that the actions and the mitigation plans are kept up to date. So actually the overarching risk may be there for a long length of time, but our mitigation plans
keep being refreshed so that we are tackling it in a live way.
Good, thank you. This is a touchstone for the BAF, and we review it regularly every now and we reviewed it last time. So if there are no further questions, can we move on to the Chair's report, which is obviously from myself. Several things that have been going on from my perspective, one of which is internal visits. I had a very interesting visit to ISIS, which gave me a chance to really understand more about trauma-informed care and helped me really understand the importance of asking about what is it that makes people behave the way they are rather than what is wrong with them. That's probably a very lay way of putting it, but that's the way in which it was done. And also real insight. I'm not giving a full report, but it would be on these ones. So these are just sort of insights that I think have bubbled up as I've been thinking about it, putting together my report. Also the intractable issue of gang violence, which again I think has been highlighted to us with the death of the young man in Woolwich, which seems, from what I can see, to be a similar sort of thing. And the difficulties about dealing that in minoritized communities is something that we're going to have to we're going to have to face. If we will talk more about the awards ceremony, though, my ability to attract attention or problems is highlighted there when some of the prison teams tried to get me to the floor at one stage in the Baltic ones, but we'll leave that down. It was a great pleasure also to attend the Medical Advisory Council and the Associated Education Awards as well. Very useful afternoon, very good afternoon. And again, I won't reflect on all of it, though I think what impressed me was, in a way, the realism and determination of the medical staff. There was a sense that actually they're not living in cloud cuckoo land, knowing what the problem is, knowing what the limitations are, but wanting to achieve it. I was really impressed with that one. Iffy and I also met with the MP, local MP Gareth Bacon, for the early intervention in psychosis team. Other people have commented upon the work of the early intervention in psychosis team, so I won't do that one. I think the reflection on the interaction with the MP was actually, it was really useful because there was a lot about our services that he didn't know about, and we were able to tell him about. He has a strong interest. He was a prison minister before, but he didn't know we did anything in prisons, and so actual fact, opening up those avenues to him was useful. And also, Iffy and I were able to get across to him and push back a bit on sometimes the unhelpful knee-jerk reactions that can happen within media and political circles to events. And I think that he took that on board, which I think is useful. In recent days, we've also had both Iffy and Rachel and myself at one level, and Abby and myself in another level, had conversations with the HIN and with other bodies, starting with the HIN, which is the Academic Health Sciences Network, as was renamed for South London. Abby and I met with them, I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Really interesting that their priorities are mental health and chronic conditions such as cardiovascular disease and metabolic disorders. I think the balanced way of coming out to it is that we probably had insufficient understanding about how they benefit us, and that's something that Abby is going to be working on with them. And also, how do we influence their work? Because we are their major plank being mental health and cardiovascular and diabetes and a bit of respiratory as well. Actually, there's perhaps more they could do to help us, and we're perhaps insufficiently understanding how that can be, how that can happen. So that's a piece of work that we're going to push forward. And then Iffy and Rachel and myself had a very interesting conversation with King's Health Partners, who are the Academic Health Sciences Centre based around King's College London, who are refreshing their strategy and wanting to know how to go together. And it was an early type conversation. I think we were really focusing on what could we bring to it and what could they bring to us. And I think the answer is we don't quite know, but Rachel and them are going to go away and do some thinking around that one. But I think there are some opportunities, not only around research, but also around the ability of doing perhaps more contract pharmaceutical research in this area, but also on the population health and equity, where they could provide a lot of academic resource to support some of what we're doing, and around the workforce and probably other things as well. And I think there are some more key meetings coming up, which I think are going to be important as we play a role in the place. There's one on the 23rd around Queen Mary Sidcup here about developing how do we get the ICB and other partners to develop a more strategic thinking around how do we actually make the most of this site, and that's going to be interesting. And I think that one of my reflections is that the stream of innovation and how do we do innovation is perhaps the thing that we are changing most from the last strategy. It's the bit that we really seem to be pushing. I think other than that, everything has continued. The interactions with the ICB, South London Partnerships, we've got a big meeting next week, I think it is, around South London Partnerships, and things are moving forward there. I think they're very much what everybody would expect them to be at this stage in town, and I'm sure Iffy will say, Iffy will say more about them where relevant. But I think that is all very much as was, I would say, nothing particularly new there, just more of the same. Happy to take any questions or comments. No, I always do that with my report. Iffy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as I always do, I'll assume my report is read and I simply voice over a few things. We previously talked about the 10-year NHS plan consultation, and you recall we did some work. As I reread our submission, I was really quite proud, really pleased, and I'm incredibly grateful to colleagues who put this together, Sally and others. I think it's a really good submission, so that's great. And we also did some work in December on the Insightful Provider Board, so not much to say there. Planning guidance is not out, but we will talk about this some more in part 2. There were just a couple of things that are not in my report that have since come onto the scene. So the first is that the government has announced new reforms and an independent commission to transform social care. So we've all talked about how moving from hospital to community is going to be heavily reliant on reforms to social care. And Baroness Casey has been appointed as the independent person to chair the commission into adult social care. It's intended that she'll report in 2 stages. Sounds a bit like the Darcy report as well. So in 2026, she'll set out the vision for adult social care and make recommendations. And then in 2028, she'll set out longer-term recommendations to transform adult social care. I think the government is keen that this is a cross-party event or activity. And the hope, of course, is that we'll get to a point where there is clarity about what the state should be responsible for and what individuals should be responsible for, particularly in the light of the rising demands on social care. And then the second thing, which is no news really, is the government's announcement on Monday titled Reform to Elective Care, which at first glance you would think, oh, well, there's not a great deal here for Oxleas, but there are aspects of the reform that Oxleas will engage in. Andrew has already talked about the meeting we have planned here on the 23rd. With all providers across Southeast London. And so you could construe the suggestion that more CDCs will open. There's one to open here at the end of March. There will be an expectation that the CDC will open 12 hours each day, 7 days of the week. That's a conversation that I'm sure we'll have at some point with the provider LGT. And then there's also the expectation that there will be more surgical hubs. You may know we have 7 theatres here at Queen Mary's that we're responsible for. But I think the key highlights from that announcement is that currently we have 59% of people who are seen within 18 weeks. It's expected that over the course of this year, certainly over the course of the next financial year until March 2026, that number will rise from 59% to 65% who need to be seen within 18 weeks. And then by the end of the parliament, it should rise to 92%. So the government has decided to stage it. Why is that useful? I think if you read reports be it HSG or the Guardian or papers. People are wondering how we're going to achieve this without any new money, where we're going to get staff from, etc. But I think it is worth acknowledging that this is the government looking at the reality and thinking we've got to face this differently. I can't help but comment on or mention some of the commentaries I read, such as the PM saying that it's his intention to drag care out of hospital and into the community, and the Secretary of State for Health saying that the NHS will go the way of Woolies unless it's brought into the 21st century. I think comments like that are frankly unhelpful. It kind of makes those of us who work in the NHS and lead the NHS feel as though we absolutely we don't get it or we're doing nothing. You'll also see in my report a number of trust events, many of which I will say we remain incredibly proud of. The Innovation Conference, the Smashing It event, Disability Month, and of course the Staff Awards that Andrew has already alluded to. And then the final thing I just want to mention is how delighted I am indeed that we achieved a higher completion rate on our staff survey, 60%. Obviously, I wait eagerly for what he's going to tell us. But it's good to see that year on year, we seem to achieve a higher completion rate. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ife. Abby.
I'm just following on from Ife's comment about the staff survey. I think the offender health completion rate was fantastic considering where they were and where they got to. So just to sort of mention that and note that.
Thank you.
And I have written to them, and I think they got an award or something. Not sure exactly what, to thank them for their efforts.
Good. Other questions for Ife on that one? So I think, a lot of, again, very much as the reflections going around the table at the beginning of this meeting, a lot of things going on at the moment, but actually some great opportunities, I think, coming out of that one, which I think is really good. Okay, so we now move on to an update on the strategy. Sally, you wrote this paper with Rachel and yourself, so.
Yes, so in Rachel's absence, I'll present it. So you remember we launched a strategy in September, which involved sharing a summary with all members of staff and also writing out to partners and members with details of the strategy and animations and things like that. Over the past quarter, we've been focusing on working with our directorates to really make the strategy real for them. And so we're working through what the priorities would look like in each clinical area. So in the pack, there are overarching summaries. And Rachel Townsend and her team will also be doing workshops with each of the directorates to actually form those into more detailed action plans. So what actions are we going to take forward the strategy in each of the areas? We've also been looking at how we're reporting on how we're implementing the strategy. And in this pack, we've got one of the first templates being used, the sustainability update coming through the Business and Infrastructure Committee. And we're working through particularly with the Quality Committee because quite a lot of the priority area fits within the Quality Committee, working through things like the dashboard so that can give us an overview more easily, but how we can make that reporting a little bit more straightforward, just to make sure that we do see the wood and the trees, and so that just taking a little bit more thinking through. But really just wanted to make sure that we were giving you an update of the work that is taking place on the strategy, and to show that it is being implemented and it is a live document that's being taken forward. Happy to answer any questions.
Let's go to Joe.
Just on the sustainability update, so it is the first time. Rachel kindly produced that after we considered it at the meeting. So that format, everything on it is what we discussed, but that format is new. So I guess any comments and questions, if anyone's got any, if we can feed that back into the so that we can answer those and do it better next time. Thanks, Rachel, for doing that in a very compressed timescale.
Thank you, Jim.
Just two questions, really. One more general question about innovation and how we define that, because I can see it sitting under quality, which is fine. I understand patient outcomes and sitting under digital. There may be a wider breadth or definition of innovation that I've been talking to Andrew about. So maybe just putting that as a comment. Second question is following on from Joe. I like the new template, but from my point of view, it would be more useful if that template referenced those implementation plans that you're going to be developing with the milestones, so we can actually see a time-based assessment against what we thought we would do.
So I think that will be part of the work with the subcommittees of kind of taking ownership of that area and then working through the material coming through from directorates. So I think perhaps discussions with each of the committee chairs might be a good way of taking that forward. And definitely innovation. I think we're already planning a session within the exec on looking at the breadth of innovation. And there will be things that won't fit neatly within our board subcommittees. So perhaps that would also be a topic for a board away day where we kind of look at things in the breadth. It's always that tension, isn't it, between getting it defined in silos, but then looking at across the breadth of the organisation as well.
Thank you. I see Sophie's online, but just think, yes, so I think we need to do some work on that innovation and think through, yes, how we're going to report that through. So that would be welcome. Sophie.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting to see how the strategy translates into. Sorry, my iPad's just told me I need to update it. Let me just remind me later. Yeah, how it translates into the different directorates. I'm interested in partnerships in terms of reporting, because I can see that it goes to the executive and the partnerships committee. I'm assuming that's the SLP committee that meets. How will the board get information on partnerships?
So that will come up through the partnerships committee and also direct from the exec. I mean, I am looking at that area particularly at the moment of defining, I suppose, working through more of a kind of annual work plan, because obviously partnerships could be incredibly broad. So do we link that in with, say, ill health prevention and using our partnerships as a way of supporting other aspects of the strategy? So that is an area of being looked through at the moment as well.
Yes, if I could come back on that's really helpful, because I think it is. And when we discussed the strategy as a whole, we talked about partnerships in the same way as addressing health inequalities as a golden thread that runs through everything. So defining it and what that looks like would be really useful, because I can see it comes across in each one of the directorate summaries in different ways. So it'd be great to see what we can learn from each one and then learn across the piece. Thanks.
A nice welcome and opportunity perhaps at a board strategic away day of sort of testing out a shape of what we're seeking to do with it, so that we've then got a framework to report back on.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I think, again, making connection through to a previous thing, the work that Abby and I were doing yesterday around the HIN also points to the need to bring partnerships in on it, that sort of partnership. Suzanne, I think you hand up.
Thanks. I just wanted to comment on the reporting process. I did find myself thinking that there's an enormous amount of data that we have and that we look at the quality committee, and it's quite challenging to stand back from that mass of data, which provides us with month-on-month assurance to say, okay, what's our strategic direction and what are the things which are getting in the way? And that sort of takes me back to the narratives which came forward in the board papers this time. I recognise that there's another piece of work to be done, which is about measurement. But I think I'm struggling at the moment to see where the kind of key gaps are in each of our directorates and how that relates to the strategic direction. And that some of these are quite difficult to measure, so that all of the directorates are stating quite rightly that they're committed to kind and compassionate care. But we need to have ways of understanding whether or not that aspiration is being met, and whereabouts it's not being met, and what we do about it when it's not. So having had an initial correspondence with Rachel, I'd quite like to kind of sit down with the team and say, okay, given how much of this falls to the Quality Committee, how are we going to approach pulling together all of the data that we have, and also reporting it to the board in a way that is digestible, because at the moment even the kind of reports which come from our 2 monthly committees are very long. So I think perhaps that's part of something which needs to go into thinking about the measurement across the piece, not just directorate by directorate.
So it picks up actually a little bit, I think, of the theme that you've done, Suzanne. So the bit that I would have liked to see a little bit more from each one of the directorates was further articulation about the improvement of data quality, because that's one of the issues that is hampering some of that measurement element. So having that much more kind of closely aligned, along with how we're going to improve data capture of outcome measures, because we're also significantly behind on that, and then how that will link into productivity, which I think is the key element really that's going to address the question that you've raised, Suzanne. And I think we just need a little bit more thinking from the directorates about how they're going to try and support those three to allow to meet that dynamic.
Thank you. And I think my comment, I'm going to throw in now because it's sort of similar. I really like these directorate plans as they were outlined. My question is, have we yet mapped to make sure there's nothing missing from the bottom up? Are there any areas that are cold that are missing? Is it either in terms of our staff or the people that we're serving or the services?
So I think that would be the focus of the workshops, to really go into things in a bit more depth, to do that kind of gap analysis and really identifying what are the priorities.
Just my reflection is we also need to be careful that we don't spend a great deal of time trolling data and trolling things into a document. Work continues. Our reflection earlier, and I like the point about certain things must be threads that run through everything. Inequality, for example, where we can. Partnership, but do we need to capture every single one of those things? Question mark for me. And your point, Azra, about data, etc. I think when I look at living within our means and maximizing productivity, you can only do that if you've got the data to show what you're doing and if you can show through outcomes. So it's about how we carefully agree the metrics we're going to use. And I was just reflecting, Suzanne, the point you made about compassionate and caring way of delivering care. We used to previously look at complaints to the nth degree, but recognizing that complaints constitute, I haven't done the math in a long time, often the numbers are like 0.04% of the total number of people we see. But it will still be useful to get the themes from the complaints and make sure that the directorate and the teams where they arise are able to reassure us that they've looked at the complaints and that they're doing something about it. So the board just needs to know the themes, but the assurance has got to be that those teams where those complaints have been made are really working on them and seeking to learn and improve the delivery.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, it was really just to pick up the point that you raised and what Sally was saying. So just to bring it to life as an example around the work around inequalities. We're taking the approach of asking each directorate to kind of name their kind of 3 priority areas, and we have a workshop coming up next week, and then the cross-cutting work streams, which are led by colleagues like Abby and Neil around thinking about the dimensions of experience and outcome, etc. We're kind of reframing them as enablers. So what is it that the directorates need from the wider organisation to address these priorities? But also it gives us an opportunity then to kind of make sure we've got an aligned approach and we haven't got kind of idiosyncrasy, unhelpful idiosyncrasy kind of creeping in.
Suzanne?
I just wanted to come back on the kind and compassionate piece and the way in which we communicate our strategy, because I was having a discussion with Vicky recently about one of the wards where there has been a lot of emphasis on our bed management, bed efficiencies, and I'm not going to name it, but the discussion was, has the focus on that affected their prioritization of kindness and compassion? And the view on some quarters is it has. And I think that that's why not everything we say at board filters down to the front line. But I think that what it is incumbent on us to do is to hold, as it were, a kind of balanced scorecard in mind, and to be saying we are asking you to achieve some quite difficult things in terms of, reducing waiting times and so on, and moving people through our beds. But at the same time, it is one of our strategic goals to provide kind and compassionate care. And so I think it's helpful to have ways of measuring that. And that's, we've been having a discussion with Julie about it following the improvement conference, and whether there are good measures that we can be using. So I think what I'm trying to say is it's behoven on us to maintain that balance, because we've seen what happens in healthcare organisations when you go too far in the direction of efficiency and productivity, and forget that we also need to be encouraging our staff to take the time to be kind and compassionate.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Sally, there's a very rich conversation there, some helpful points. I don't think any torpedoes onto the water, but you're happy incorporating those in. So what's the next stage for all of these as far as the board is concerned? What would we next see?
I think it will be discussions with individual committee chairs and shaping that up into probably a proposal that will come to a strategic away day, so that we can then have a regular format coming through into the board meetings.
And so for a relatively soon strategic days, we get on with it. And then I think as well, we keep an eye on the reporting, because I think we need to get the right reports without either drowning ourselves or making people spend ages filling in forms that aren't useful, but making sure that we really concentrate on the stuff that's important. Thank you. I'm going to suggest that we go do the operational report now with Ian, and then we'll have a quick break after that for a leg stretch. Thank you. Ian.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. So the detailed reports from each directorate are included in the reading room. As usual, I've attempted to summarise the report from each directorate on the front sheet, and I'm very happy to take any questions that colleagues have around that. And then in addition, I've, as Joe's already alluded to, I've provided an update on neighbourhood-based care. Obviously, we had the discussion at the strategic board in December, and I've just attempted to kind of provide an update since then, essentially trying to give a sense of how South East London wants to ensure that there's an aligned framework or approach across all 6 places. But also I've provided some detail of where Bromley, Bexley and Greenwich is in their journey, and you can see that they're all at slightly different places, with Bexley very much being out in front, to the point where we're now entering into more detailed conversations about the integrator function and how that is best delivered. Alluded to it right at the beginning, we're in winter, and the seasonal winter pressures are very much being felt across the system, particularly with our 2 local acute trusts. Oxleas colleagues across a range of directorates actually are trying to support the kind of flow and help colleagues manage demand. What I would say is that particularly on the kind of physical health side, colleagues from our community physical health services are very much a presence within ED, looking at opportunities to kind of provide people with care in the community as an alternative to hospital. But anecdotally, it's pretty clear that most of those people in ED need to be in hospital and are actually quite poorly, which could be interpreted that we have exhausted every opportunity to treat them in the community. But I think that's kind of an interesting point that I wanted to raise, because I think the impact that community services like ours has is often a bit hidden from the kind of wider system. So it's really about having opportunities to kind of bring that work to life, which I know directorate colleagues are doing in our kind of local urgent and emergency care boards. And I think we're doing well at the moment in terms of kind of, on the whole, reducing demand, mental health demand to ED, but ensuring that people move through as quickly as possible. And then finally, there's an update, the usual update on performance in the report, and the detail of that is discussed on a monthly basis at the Quality Committee. But I just wanted to highlight the work that we're embarking on across all directorates around enhancing the visibility around weights, and the work being taken to then, on the back of that, to actually improve our performance. And colleagues will be aware that we've got some particular challenges in some directorates that we're working hard to address. And then the final thing, which is alluded to quite briefly in the report, colleagues, I think, will be aware that Lisa Thompson, who is the Director of our Children and Young People Services, she will be retiring at the end of the financial year. But I'm delighted to say that we have appointed a worthy successor to her in the form of Jenny Yoseliani, who is currently the Associate Director for our Adult Learning Disability Services. So we will obviously make sure that we give Lisa a good farewell, but I feel confident that she will be passing the directorate on to, a very good and strong leader. So,
thank you, Ian, and thank you for the comments on Lisa and her successor, and we look forward as well to meeting her in her new role. Questions or comments for Ian? Jo?
Just a couple. Firstly, just in terms of recognition of what we do in the community, I did know I was catching up with some HSJs, and they mentioned the JET team in Greenwich in very favourable terms compared to what's happening, I think, in northwest London or maybe elsewhere. So that was nice to see, kind of out of the blue. I was pleased to see the opening this year of the new healthcare unit at Wandsworth. I think when we took over that service, it was imminent. It would be nice for staff to work in an area that you can't smell dying rats. That would be quite good, although I know it also brings some challenges in terms of location as well, but I was pleased with that. Page 68 talks about the struggle to open a new ward, the reconfiguration of wards. I am expecting, as we move forward on that, for a business case to come to Business and Infrastructure Committee, just to sort of lodge that. I think you know that. And then the only other thing I was going to say in terms of the update on neighbourhood-based care, are you beginning to see any changes in what and where things are funded as a result of that work, or is that not quite happening yet?
I mean, I think the short answer is no. I mean, Azra and myself, other colleagues are in what feels like quite a difficult round of conversations around funding intentions for next year, and I think it still feels early stages around that. I mean, I think the neighbourhood-based care is a real opportunity to kind of flow the money to where it needs to be, but it also, there's so many kind of variables and factors that then have to be considered. It's actually quite a complex process to get right, and I think it will be a test of relationships at place level. I think, but I would say, I think, we have, as have other system partners, invested in those relationships. So I think we've got the right kind of context and environment to have them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that landing them is going to be easy. Particularly, as I've already talked about, there's continued pressure on acute, and that can drive kind of short-term thinking, really. Yeah.
Just wanted to add that the ICB received a paper at its last board with a proposal of how to increase funding in community health as part of the shift from hospital to community, but that hasn't yet landed, so that was just an initial proposal. And I know this is quite some way up, and not quite what you were describing. But the other thing to say is that I suspect that thing about money shifting will be a few years down the line, because the initial conversation, as Ian has said, and as his paper has outlined, is just agreeing what it will look like across the 6 boroughs and then prioritizing. So Bexley, for example, wants to prioritize frailty as a thing to start off with. They like to do something on children. So we haven't quite got to that point at all. These are just initial plans.
Just say thank you, Ian, for the report. It was really good summary. I really appreciated it. One question, really. I think we've seen this in quality coming through, but maybe you can shed more light on, I think the phrase here, sort of new, younger, older person demographic in CMH.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I guess it's reflective of a kind of societal shift, considering what we mean by being an older person. So I think there's definitely a kind of mental health that is linked to the kind of aging process, and the kind of physical health needs that people have. But I think we're seeing people who have had kind of lifelong, in some cases, associations with adult mental health services, who are now getting older, and they're not getting old as early as they used to, and it's really interesting that kind of theories around kind of, for example, personality disorder, I guess, they kind of formed in maybe 20 years ago. I can remember, a lot of work being done around that, and that population is now older. And what does that mean in terms of kind of managing risk? And I think it's challenging traditional conventions around, kind of risk management for that group, really. So I think Abby is much more expert on this, but I think it's challenging sort of monolithic views around old people. And in some ways, it's a good thing. They're individuals, because one of my issues, if I'm honest, is I think as people get older, they see their kind of individuality sort of goes out the window. So I think in some ways, it's a good thing that the report hopefully kind of indicates that we're looking at much more personalised care, which happens to be kind of a focus on risk, say. But I think it's possibly a good thing. So that's a rambling answer, but
a very, very good answer, Ian. I tend to sort of illustrate it by saying the people that fit into older adult services now are Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, Joe Biden. So they're not the kind of flat cap, knit in kind of what you see with older adults. And that comes with its risks. So it's a change in profile of what is defined as an older adult. So those are the ones that we refer to as younger older adults. And it's because the retirement age has changed. People are working well into their 70s. So the mental health need has also changed. But the flip side of that is because we've also got long-term conditions, we're starting to see people with early onset dementia much earlier on. So it's just being aware of how the cohorts is changing.
It's a sort of separation of biological age from functional age, isn't it, in a way? There was somebody who started wearing a flat cap over Christmas because I'm getting cold through my head. I don't quite know where to put myself on that.
Thanks. I also had a question about one of the items in the report, and it's on page 68 or 69. And it was about the community physical health director working to manage patient flow within the Home First teams. And I was quite struck that it said this involves sending senior staff to support hospitals during peak times, although they found few patients suitable for their services, echoing a recent audit from NHSE. And I'm just wondering what that's about, Ian, and whether a service has been commissioned on the basis of a misunderstanding about how the money can best be used. But perhaps you could just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates to what I was saying before. So we send individual senior practitioners as part of an agreed system response when acute hospitals are running kind of hot, and they are identifying few people who we can treat safely in the community. They're poorly people that need to be in an acute hospital. And I guess my sense is through services like JET, which is part of a wider Home First ethos, we are pretty adept now between ourselves and primary care at kind of spotting treatment needs for people and supporting them to live in the community. Services like JET are there to respond at times when perhaps their needs are going up, and we think about, can we treat them safely so they don't need to come into hospital. But I guess there are times when people just need to be in hospital, and you can't duck that really. So if I'm honest, I think our services often question whether it's a good use of their time. But I think we have to kind of see ourselves as part of that system, and hospitals attract attention, and that is where the pressure is experienced. So yeah, that's kind of what we have to do. But I think it's really important that the learning from those practitioners is fed back into things like the urgent and emergency care boards, and Sarah, the director, is a member of the local board and will do that. Yeah. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting reflection on the limitations of trying to push everything into the community. And I think that we need to be honest about that some of those constraints.
And just to add, I've just checked with Ian, your question about has this been commissioned inappropriately? We're not commissioned to do this. This is the way we respond as a system to support the acute.
And I guess it makes me think as well that we need to start thinking with the shift to hospital to community. How do we actually measure that? How do we know whether we're shifting people appropriately or not, so that we know whether our interventions have been useful? So I think that's something that maybe we as probably at the ICB level, we need to do.
And I should say that as well as that kind of front end intervention, the other thing we do is to send practitioners onto wards to liaise with the kind of MDT there to spot potential for people to come out of hospital early, or kind of challenge any kind of thought that they need to be in hospital for any longer. And what's interesting, broadly speaking, is that what they come up against is sort of a kind of risk averse approach from clinicians in an acute setting. So myself and my opposite number and her deputy are having a conversation with Sarah about, are there kind of cultural dimensions to that? Is it around the fact that acute colleagues don't understand what is happening in the community, or what we can do in terms of kind of managing clinical risk? So we're really trying to get under the the bonnet, if you like, of that culturally. And it's taken a bit of a while, but we've got the first of hopefully a series of conversations coming up in the next couple of weeks. So because colleagues get frustrated that there are people in hospital we could treat at home or say in intermediate care, but they face resistance. Yeah.
Just building on that, you mentioned the resistance from clinicians. Are we facing resistance from the patients themselves as well? Are they hesitant about the community care? And go ahead.
I think they can be, and I think their kind of network of their informal system of support, be it family or kind of friends, they also get anxious. And we see that are in our own, where we run acute services in mental health. We see that that's a kind of common barrier to discharge, and that's something that can be quite a challenge, I think, for clinicians to manage. And I do think it's an area that we need to support them with, because these are quite nuanced conversations, and I think we could all relate to the fact that if we've got a loved one in hospital, then the thought of if they've been ill of coming home is quite a big step to take, let alone for the patient themselves. So.
No, I think Ian has said it. And I think with our acute colleagues, they're on a journey that mental health was on 10, 15 years ago in terms of the shift from big hospitals to community, but there are also ancillary services that are needed in order to provide care in the community. And some of those services are now means tested, which then changes the dynamic of whether people feel able for their relatives, friends, families to come in. So just as Ian said, it's very nuanced. So we just need to continue to have those conversations with our system partners, as well as with carers and groups.
Thank you. And I think this concept of different groups involved in healthcare having different concepts of risk and things is really important. Been speaking personally with a frail father-in-law, the ambulance services want to scoop him and take him to hospital, which wouldn't do much good. But it's that concept of risk that we need to deal with. And there's also this myth that we've built up about in society that the hospital is the place of safety. And we've got that really strong sort of sense in society of that and how we weaken that. Last comment to Sophie, and then we will break for 11s.
Yes, it was just a reflection on this discussion, really, and how it relates to the triangle of care, how the perception of care in the community and the perception of not being admitted to hospital or being discharged from hospital is received by carers, and how we communicate that. So it's something maybe to think about what kind of narrative we put around it, what kind of language we use when we talk about it, because as Ian has said, I think it could be perceived as something to be very fearful of if you are not admitted to hospital. So how do we think about decreasing that fear through the way in which we communicate it, particularly to carers?
Yeah, I think this narrative one's a really good one. And where would we be developing that sort of narrative in the trust, helping do that one? Where's Neil?
So we're developing and have just developed and co-produced our carers and support network strategy with our new carers lead. So that will be coming through PEG and through the quality committee. So we're looking at just those kind of factors in that. But absolutely agree with Sophie. There is a real fear and also a real myth that hospitals are safe. And I think sometimes it also hospitals are also respite for carers as well, and so sometimes these two things get conflated, and that's what we want to think about.
Thank you. Right, let's break for coffee and meet again at noon, 12 o'clock. So 15 minutes, leg stretch and coffee or whatever. Everybody. So we are now going into the non-exec director reports, and as I said, I want to just try doing it a little bit before, because I felt slightly before we were dotting around a lot, and so ask each non-executive director to summarise the visits that they've done in total, particularly pulling out the themes of them, and also anything else, any other ones I've had. If there is nothing, then the answer is, I haven't had any visits this month or this last period, and that's absolutely fine. That's probably the best, that's a fine way of dealing with it. But trying to pull out that slightly more thematic, and also having us less jumping around. So I'll just turn around and I'll start so it's unfair, Nina, just as you've started eating.
I haven't done any visits in the period. I haven't done any visits over the period, but Abby and I are hoping to resume quite soon the visits to CYP. So hopefully next time there will be a report.
Okay. No.
I've got 4 reports in the pack. So I'm not sure about themes, but I'll highlight 1 or 2 things which I think do have sort of linked to some of the other papers we've got, actually. So the first one, which I did by myself, normally I'm with Jane, is on page 78 of the pack to Joydens. So I'm visiting forensic services. Very interesting visit. Real focus on physical health and well-being, and the consultant there has done so much, I think, across the directorate in terms of promoting physical health, which was great. The other side of, or linked to that, is Joydens doesn't have the chill cook food. It does its own cooking. And I think with mixed results, actually. And I noticed in the quality report, there's quite a focus on a food strategy, particularly in wards where we've got long stay. So I think that's very interesting. The action there is, and I would raise, I think this is quite important. So Joydens is quite a remote ward on the site. You have to go past the farmhouse to get there from the main building, where we have male patients who are living sort of semi-independently. And a number of staff raised the issue that if you're called out in the night because the alarm's gone off elsewhere, or presumably at the moment anyway, just because we've got short days, they would prefer a bit better lighting there because it is quite dark. So it'd be good to pick that up. My next one is on page 84 of the pack. I've lost all my page numbers, which was Jane and I visited Bexley Police Custody. Never been there before. Very interesting. We'd met some of the liaison diversion team before. It was great to actually see their work in a custody suite. The key thing there, and we'll be coming to sort of the wider liaison diversion team in part 2, is the number of different organisations, parts of Oxleas, police, custody sergeant, the key relationships they have, and how much teams of maybe 1 or 2 individuals in different locations having to deal with. Very impressive. And we saw very good relations across, behind the scenes at the police station there. So that was great that we were able to see that. Next one is on page 86, which was to the Tilt. Really good visit, very similar conclusions, I think, to our visit to Mariposa House, which is the female hostel. Great work going on there. As always, the difficulty is finding appropriate places for people to move on to once they've reached that point where that would be a positive move for them. Lots of multi-agency organisation, but great working between Oxleas and Bridge staff. And then the final one was the FIND team, Forensic Intellectual Neurodevelopmental Disabilities team. Really good team, but an overriding theme that we got from that team is they'd been subject to a service reconfiguration discussion, negotiation, consultation for quite a long time, and they were very much bearing the scars of that. And I think, as we move into a world where I think we are ever more joined up with different services and different organisations, and we are reconfiguring services, I wonder if we can think, as we change and reconfigure services, how we can pay perhaps a bit more attention to what individuals are thinking about and feeling during that process. Because I think, it does cause lengthened timescales where there's uncertainty with staff. And we had 2 members of staff there who knew that their roles were finishing at the end of March. They didn't know if they were going to get alternative roles, for example. It was obviously continuing to be quite upsetting for them. So I do think, that is kind of the world we're in, but we just need to have a think about this, if there's anything more we can do. I think they were my visits.
Your last comment around that, I don't think that's become an action in a way. There's a particular action around it, and I just wonder whether that's something that we should ask Rachel to comment on. Do you think?
For the individual team, I think there's clearly actions in place.
The action, but that broader one that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Joe and I have had a conversation following the visit. I mean, it would take quite a long time to explain some of the context. Just picking up on the kind of particular individuals that Joe has raised, I think there's not one consultation here. So there's a consultation around Find as a whole, and the fact that that's going to be 3 trust services, as the report says. But in the current configuration, there has been a kind of short-term funded service specifically for Croydon, and there's the question around whether that will continue or not. And in the future, come March, that will be SLAM's business to sort out, because obviously Croydon is part of their footprint. So it's meant a kind of two-stage approach to the tender. But I mean, Joe's absolutely right. There's always learning around the kind of emotional impact, and that's something that when I was kind of covering the service, I tried to address. Some ways successfully, in some ways not so. But yeah.
We do have a change policy which involves engagement and involving people, but I think it also picks up on what Suzanne was saying earlier about, as we go into maybe more tighter financial position where we are making difficult decisions, of trying to keep that kindness and compassion there, and making sure that we we ensure that we make time for those kind of discussions to take people on the journey emotionally as well.
Yeah, and I understand that, and Ian, you were praised by the team largely for your interventions in the process. I think it's more the fact. So in that in the wider team consultation, for example, I think there'd been some work done by someone from outside the area to look at options and talk to staff and things like that. So and that's before you get into. So what is the conclusion of that? So there's that period of uncertainty. And I guess I'm thinking that as we're doing more integrated working with other organisations, there's going to be more of that. And I don't know what the answer is, but, that of itself creates a lot of uncertainty for staff, because they can see the way the wind's blowing and whatever. So, it's just life, I think, is more joined up and connected, but there are, that could be an issue in the future. So, sorry, crumb just went down my throat. So I think it would be good to sort of just have a think about whether we can add anything to that policy, for example, that might make a difference in those situations.
And also reflecting on the partnership aspect of the strategy about a facilitator for working better in partnership is understanding those sort of personnel issues.
Thank you. Good. Jim.
Thanks, Joe. Just a quick question about the tilt and the connection with Mariposa House. I mean, one thing, really impressed that we have like 24 months worth of support for some of these residents, which is quite a long term compared to what we do elsewhere. And also the thought around they desired some sort of continuing ongoing contact with that team which they've sort of developed relationships with. So the question really is, as they leave the tilt, are they just passed back to community, or is there some residual type of contact? Because there could be an opportunity there in terms of supporting these service users.
Yeah. I mean, normally when people leave the tilt, they would continue to have contact with the community forensic team. So we have a small community forensic team who are working with service users at tilt and Mariposa, and then onwards from that in terms of living in the community. At some point, it very much depends on the index offence and the risk profile, but some people have a long-term relationship with the forensic community team, and others may pass back to community mental health. But it's a very managed process, because not just from a clinical risk point of view, but also from a kind of home office point of view, there's a whole kind of framework around that. So,
thank you, Joe. Sophie?
Hello, yes. So there are 2 visits in the pack. I had to send my apologies for one of them, which is on page 80. So I'm hoping maybe Ian can pick that one up if possible. I went to Holbrook Ward, that's on page 75. That's part of the unit. Is that okay, Ian, if you pick up after I've done mine? Great. So Holbrook is the only dementia ward that Oxleas provides. And we had a very good visit, very long visit. We intended to visit 2 wards within Woodlands, but we just stayed at Holbrook. It was really interesting to see the physical design of the wards. I think it was way ahead of its time. It's really dementia friendly, so people can see and be seen. There's very clear colour coding, and it really brought home the importance of the physical environment when we're providing care. And again, I think that links to our overall approach to co-production. If we can maybe think about how physical spaces are co-designed, as well as how we deliver the services within those spaces. The dedication of the staff is really apparent, and they did reflect on, as we've heard across a lot of visits, on the increased complexity of the patients that they're working with, and how that has led to issues with safety on staff. But we also had a really interesting reflection on compassion and how staff translate the concept of compassion, particularly when it comes to supporting a team within a ward, and how it can become the case that translates into carrying everyone's burdens on your shoulder, rather than potentially engaging with the wellbeing offer that Oxleas has. So it was a good opportunity for staff within acute and crisis to talk about the staff assemblies, for example, all the other things that are in place to maybe relieve a bit of that burden, and also to empower staff to speak up when they feel that it's becoming too much. So I thought that was a good conversation, and it was interesting to hear staff reflections on it. That's all I have from that, unless anyone has any questions.
Do you think there are any?
Great. Hand over to Ian.
Ian.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sophie. So actually, Rachel and I did this visit together. So we visited 3 separate teams. The first was the health-based place of safety at Oxleas House. I mean, really great team, great leadership. I think we focused quite a lot, or the conversation focused on 2 things really. One is the environment, and I think this is in the context that we've had some, because of the nature of the service, the environment takes quite a lot of damage, and that then inevitably can lead to potential risk, but also means that the suites can be closed for periods of time for repair. So I think we started to have a conversation about, are there things that we can do, which we probably need to kind of continue. I'm not sure that there's necessarily an easy answer. These are kind of suites that were kind of put in place a few years ago. They were designed appropriately, but unfortunately service users find innovative ways of tearing them apart at times. So we obviously need to review that. The other thing that came as an action from that was there's a kind of highlighting that Oxleas House as a building. There is a limited physical space there, and I think there was a very clear message being conveyed that some kind of better facility for staff to take a break would be really helpful. And I think that's, if you've been to health-based place of safety, the work itself, but the environment as well, means that you can absolutely understand why people need to get out of there and take a break. The second thing was the Greenwich Older People's Liaison Team. I mean, this was such a positive visit. I mean, they're such a kind of passionate team, and they were at pains to point out how good the leadership is from Kevin Clinch. Kevin is one of our most experienced managers. He's worked in the community, home treatment, and now in this team. And he's a really fantastic leader. And they were at pains to point out that again, issues around space, about seeing patients in A&E came up. Not things that we can easily resolve. But yeah, really positive visit. And then the last one was to the working age adults mental health liaison team. They've got a recently appointed new manager. And again, it was broadly positive. The thing that they wanted to kind of raise is that often the people that they're seeing and they're considering the risk of are people that are presenting with social issues or substance misuse issues. And those are the kind of underlying reasons why people are pitching up in ED and distress. They are very much kind of have adopted a purposeful admission approach, which is fantastic. And I would like to just shoehorn in that currently the conversion rate of assessment to admission across our two liaison teams is something like 11%, which is the lowest I think we've ever had since I've been in Oxleas, which suggests we are finding appropriate alternatives to admission. But I think they really struggle with the emotional impact of dealing with people who are clearly in distress. And I was thinking about it earlier in the week when it's really cold weather. A lot of kind of people who have not got a home are coming to ED, and they are in distress, and our teams are having to make difficult decisions around that. But I think it kind of opened up a conversation to alternative pathways, which the team will explore further. But overall, positive visit.
So apologies, I'm in the process of writing up 3 reports, so that's for next board. And I think that Neil and I are planning our trip to the southwest to visit the 10 prisons down there from this spring, I hope.
I don't have any board reports either. We had one visit. The visit in December was rescheduled. We had one visit to the Bromley Mental Health Hub that, apologies, I don't have a report for. We didn't see, the visit was conducted on the kind of management side. We met with some of the team leaders. So it was a good visit, but also of limited insight, I would say, in some ways, because we didn't see the full scope of the service. But very interesting to see. It felt like an Aston service. It felt like a new, relatively new service, which obviously it is, but you can see the potential that it has and the benefit it can offer.
Thanks. So I've been visiting adult community physical health, and there's one report in here. A couple of visits have had to be cancelled because of illness or other difficulties. I just wanted to pull out the kind of strategic implications of the visit, because the report's in the pack. But thinking about best place to work, I think it sort of ties in a bit with some of the other comments which have been made about the suitability of our estate. And that's not something that we can wave a wand over and resolve immediately. But I think if we are really serious strategically about making Oxleas the best place to work, it does have to be a place which provides staff with nutritious, healthy options for their lunches, which has a workspace which isn't too hot or too cold. You know, those really kind of basic basic things. And so I think there perhaps needs to be a real connect between the best place to work part of the strategy and the estates provision. The other thing which struck me thinking about the health inequalities work is that there was a real enthusiast in the team who started out talking about how brilliant BAFO had been, and the team as a whole were completely unaware of BAFOS. They weren't aware of the importance of that piece of work, and I was actually wondering whether that's partly because the names are so similar that unless you're sitting very close to the centre, it's meaningless, and that we perhaps need a bit of a rebrand on the health inequalities piece of work. What was really heartening was that they had been doing quite a lot of work on trying to understand their own demographics, but didn't see how that was tying into a stronger strategic drive. So I think there's probably still quite a lot of work to do with enabling our staff to fully engage with the health inequalities thinking. But the thing that I would want to emphasise is that every single visit that I've done where we've asked questions about health inequalities, people are really interested in it. They want to provide a service that is appropriate for their local population, and they're willing to change the way that they do things. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing that came up, and I'm conscious I'm sitting next to Alison, it was this issue that staff can see real potential of some of the digital tools which are on the market, some of which have been approved or recommended by South East London, but it takes us a long time to get approval within the trust for these tools to be approved. And I'm wondering whether that's something that we could focus on as part of the strategic drive around innovation, is to make sure that we can move quickly on these things. I mean, I think there are kind of multiple levels of approval which really slow things down. So.
Thank you. Questions or comments by anybody? Okay.
I mean, just to pick up Suzanne's point. So I think we have got more work to kind of bring our approach to inequalities to light, but also to kind of connect the thinking at a local level centrally. I mean, it's interesting you said about kind of our BAFOS and BAFO too similar. I mean, that was by design, but actually in the last week, it's something that we've been debating about whether it is actually whether we need to reflect on that and whether it's causing confusion. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a workshop a week tomorrow where we're trying to kind of think about it through the lens of the directorates. Interestingly, a member of that team is a member of the trust steering group. The directorate had an event which myself, Andrew, and Iffy were at, which partly looked at inequalities. So I guess the reason I say that, not to be defensive, but it's about how you kind of communicate and how you reiterate things and how you have to really keep going at it to get things through in a large, complex organisation. So I think that's a good thing about board visits, isn't it? It kind of confronts strategy with reality, and that's why they're a good thing.
And just one brief response to Ian. I think it is a huge challenge in a trust that has so many small teams that, however much they're trying to work with other teams and respond to some of the requests from the centre, it is a constant challenge, and one that, if we bear that in mind, might be helpful.
Thank you. Alison.
Yeah, I mean, just coming back on the digital thing as well, I mean, it'd be good to explore that because I'm not quite sure where those blocks and barriers are. So it might be something that we can sort out quite quickly.
Yeah. What are real, what are perceived, and what are actually somebody has actually just said no or something. Yes. Thank you. Good. Thank you for that. Move on now to the Mortality Surveillance Committee report. Jane?
Thank you very much. This report has been discussed at the Executive Committee and the Quality Committee in December, and was looked at alongside the Q2 PSA oversight report. So we have received assurance that all of the deaths that we are aware of have been fully reviewed, and we wanted to include in this report the really thorough review that Annie Dale and Julia Waldron and Amber Williams from the Southwest prisons around Bristol have done regarding 8 deaths that occurred in HMP Bristol between November 2022 and January 2024, to see if there was any learning or any factors that could be identified that would help inform care in the future. Prison, Bristol particularly, is really difficult. People who go there have got very complex lives, but Bristol's interesting. It's a Cat B prison, has about 600 young men in it predominantly, and they get about 250 new people coming into the prison each month. So it's a hugely busy prison. And we were quite interested that they did look at anecdotally about 40 odd factors. They didn't really find anything particular. The numbers are very, very small, but there were some things around sleep and bereavement and the offences, the violent offences that people had committed, that they were particularly interested in. And they're going to continue to look at these factors in any subsequent deaths, should there be any in the near future in any of the prisons, so that we can see if there's any additional learning, and also that they want to look at improving the ligature management pathway, particularly for non-fatal ligature attempts and the assessment processes around that for people. So it's a really good piece of work, and although it didn't enlighten us any further than the investigations that we've done internally or the prison probation and ombudsman reviews or the clinical reviews, it was really worthwhile, and we're really grateful for them for spending the time to take such a thorough interest in these individuals.
Thank you, Jane. Can I just ask, just so you get a sense of scale, 8 self-inflicted deaths in that population. I know it's difficult to get the same population outside prison, but if you make some assumptions, how much higher a rate would that be than you would expect? Is that 10 or 100 times higher than you would expect in the general population, or what? Do we know?
I wouldn't have the exact figures, but it is higher than the general population. Particularly in the remand prisons, we do see a higher number as well. Yeah. Probably on a month-by-month basis. It does vary, but the majority of our sort of self-harm deaths are within the prisons.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering whether these are figures that not we have, but whether they are figures that we can get from somewhere, because that might highlight the problems.
You can try and get them from
NKISH. We might be able to get them from the NKISH reports or from the prison probation ombudsman themselves.
And it's clearly higher. It's just a question of how much. Yeah. I mean, get a sense of scale of the problem. But no, good report, and that's interesting. Jo.
I would just like to second Jane in terms of the thoroughness of that work coming through from prisons, every mortality committee. I think Annie Dale's really leading some excellent work in terms of, and you can really feel the care and the passion for those service users coming through in her report. So,
thank you. Very good report. Any other questions for Jane? Thank you, and thank you for transmitting that from the other end of the world. Suzanne, Quality Committee.
So there are just a couple of things I wanted to emphasise in this, and there's one item which we may well be able to get an update on now. We did alert the board to the issue of windows in the Bracton Centre, and at the point at which we had our meeting as a committee, there was still a question about the weighing the costs of replacing these windows and how essential it was. The committee did make the point that we felt quite strongly that we needed to focus on systemic solutions, which would mean adjusting the windows rather than expecting staff to secure the safety of patients in their bedrooms. because these windows are in the bedrooms. But it's possible that Rachel might be able to update us on that today, because I haven't had a recent update. The other thing that I just wanted to comment on, we looked at the first PSERF report that related to a full quarter when PSERF had been our main, focus, moving on from investigating incidents using RCA and so on. We got a really useful update from Sophie, who represents the Quality Committee on the PSERF Oversight Group, and I think that Sophie's view is that things are developing, and the kind of cultural shift that we'd be looking for is taking place. I don't think that cultural shift is very well represented in the Quality Committee report to board, which is my fault. I think it still focuses on numbers and investigations, and that's not what we really want to focus on. So in future, there will be a stronger focus on learning. And then the final thing just to mention, because it's come up with in relation to the bath, is that we're still working on this harm to the triangle of care risk. It's coming back again to the committee. It's being modified and redrafted by Abby. And I think that what we've learnt from this is that the patient and the carer service group review of risks is really good at identifying problems, but then we've got to get a bit better at understanding how we can really formulate a risk which reflects that view, and that has taken us a while to do. And as I say, Abby is reformulating that risk, and we'll be looking at it again in the future committee meeting.
Thank you. Rachel, do you want to comment on Windows?
I haven't had any feedback since this discussion at the meeting, but the windows at the Bracton are all anti-ligature windows, but they are an older version of the current product that we install. So the current product has a slight amendment to the design, which makes it more less risky in a sense. So I guess the question that we need to consider is how much can we invest to keep updating products on a regular basis. But we can go back and have a look at what the cost would be to do this. I can't remember how long we did these, but it's not terribly long ago in terms of window replacements. And so we'd have to look at what the benefit would be versus the cost.
Thank you. And clearly, there's a red greens weight here that we've got to think about as well. Thank you, Jo.
Just a couple of comments and questions on some of the items coming from the patient safety group. So the first is just on the SDS 40, the early release scheme from prisons, and I think even without that scheme, safe release from prison seems to be a theme that comes up quite a lot at Mortality Committee. I think we are pretty good at doing everything within our power, but the very fact that we can only give medication for some time and then people need to be registered with a GP, and we all know that's not the easiest thing in the world. So I do think if we have any opportunities to influence policy, then I think that's something that we should really keep pushing. We had at the recent, it's not covered in the mortality report, but we had at the recent mortality report just before Christmas, a really sad case of someone who was in the middle of chemotherapy services and was pretty much released homeless. Obviously, it was a mortality committee. So I do think that's something that we can, if we have the opportunity, we could use our influence on. I wondered if there was more colour on the final bullet point in that section on page 108, which talks about an increase in patient safety incidents, because I wasn't aware of an increase in patient safety incidents, and I don't know if there's more colour that could be given on those.
Perhaps Jane can pick those up.
Yes, I think I may have to go back to the report to look at which patient safety incidents that this is referring to. From memory, I can't remember if this is violence and abuse or self-harm incidents. Would it be okay if I went and checked on that so that I could be accurate for you, Jo?
Yes, of course. If you let
Thank
Joe know, and then we can circulate wider if we need to. Ian might have something to say here.
It wasn't about that. It was about the other point around release.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really, really good point, and I know the directorate are very preoccupied about it and want to do more. Just in terms of influencing policy, I, alongside one other representative of one other healthcare provider, have been invited to a roundtable conversation with Professor Chris Whitty at the end of the month, and I'm currently collecting. I mean, his role is within London, so but I'm kind of using the opportunity of us working across a wider footprint to collect any information that we can kind of use to kind of influence his thinking around this.
And the other thing, it's a bit of a side issue, but on this one, but I've been talking to my contacts in NHS Confed, and they are sort of admitting that they aren't focusing enough on prison healthcare. So I think actually they may be a body that could help us a bit on this in the future, and they seem to be willing to gear up a bit around prison healthcare. Both actually because it's important in its own issue, but also because it's a model in some ways for community healthcare within a certain type of community, and they're buying that story. So there may be ways there as well. Okay, thank you. Joe, on to you for the business and infrastructure.
Yes, I haven't got, I'll take the report as read. I haven't got a whole load to highlight. There's obviously a number of items covered in here, which we'll look at in more detail in part 2. You can see we're on track in terms of the financial position, hence the lowering of the in-year risk on the financial position. We are beginning work on the reprocurement of soft facilities management, which is a very large contract, and it's so large we have to get pre-approval from the Cabinet Office. So we saw the it says a business case. I mean, it's not what we would call a business case, but it's this stage of the process. Clearly, in due course, more will come back to both Business and Infrastructure Committee and the board, given the size of that contract. We are, Rachel, you may have an update on this, but it was good to see that we're hoping to get the PFI surveys started next month. But that the survey phase is really important in terms of both parties understanding the current state of the assets, and we've already talked about the sustainability strategy update. So I wasn't going to. We did receive, and we referred to it, I think, at the last board meeting, the detailed report on our oversight of Ryden. Obviously, they were implicated in the Grenfell report, and I think the committee was satisfied that we had the right processes in place, and we didn't need to do anything further at this time.
And if you also reported into the governor's meeting around that piece as well, which was where the issue I think originally got raised. Thank you. People's Committee, Nina.
Thank you. There's nothing that we want to alert the board to. In terms of assurance, you'll see that we have included 2 of the biannual reports that we reviewed at our meeting in November. Happy to take questions on either of those. One was safe staffing, one was the Freedom to Speak Up report. On safe staffing, the headlines are that we were assured on safe staffing and significant focus on continuing to improve rostering practices. One thing I do want to call out is that and those who've been members of People Committee over a period of time will remember this. When we first started getting this report, there was a very significant focus on a lot of data, but not necessarily the so what analysis. And I just want to commend the work that Julie and Jane have done over the past year with the directorates as well on getting to a level of granularity that helps us be able to then focus attention on some of what you've heard me describe previously as low-hanging fruit in terms of rostering practices. So it's brilliant to see the work that's happening on that front. We have, as a committee, asked for regular reporting of the recommendations in a format that enables us to oversee how those are being tracked over time. In terms of the Freedom to Speak Up report, the headlines there are that there has been a considerable increase in the number of concerns being raised. To put it into context, the overall number of concerns is 44, but that represents a 76% increase. We had quite a long discussion with Simon around the reasons for that. I think it's fair to say that his response is it's a positive. It's about the Freedom to Speak Up service getting greater visibility. And the large majority of those who access the service do so in order to be able to get impartial advice. But there is still a segment, 20%, who do so because they say they won't believe they'll be listened to. So we need to continue to have focus on that. The key themes for new concerns were consistent with previous experience: management issues, system process issues, and behaviour relationships. And interestingly, we asked Simon to give us some comparable data from other trusts that the Freedom to Speak Up service works with, and there were a number of common themes in terms of the headlines that are coming out from other trusts as well. So there was nothing from an Oxleas perspective that was different. We reviewed 2 of our risks in light of the very helpful feedback that we had from the Shadow Service User and Carer Committee, which I think we've discussed previously. From an advisory perspective, the key things here are to note that there is a new duty on employers that came in October, November, a new duty under the Equality Act that requires employers to prevent sexual harassment of their employees by taking reasonable steps. So there is a detailed programme of work that's in place, and that is due to come to the committee at our meeting next week, next Wednesday. Also, from an advisory perspective, we continue to spend time discussing fire safety compliance. We have had, and you'll be aware of, fires that we've had over the last year. So work continues on fire safety compliance with respect to the policy, with respect to training. I think underlying the reason for those fires is some of the stuff that we're continuing to grapple with in terms of the search policy and the contraband items. So that will continue to be an area of focus. It does feel much more like it is flashing amber stroke red than it was this time last year. So we did have a discussion in the context of the internal audit plan of work for next year about whether to potentially include it. Nothing more to highlight in terms of the advisory side of things, other than to say that at our meeting next week, I'd like to gently introduce, Sophie, I know you won't be able to make it, but I'd like to gently introduce the idea that we spoke about at the Board Away Day in December about just creating a little bit of space to talk about what are we seeing elsewhere that we could potentially bring into the trust. So we'll try that in AOB next week and see if there is useful knowledge or insights to share at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Jim?
Thanks, Nina. Just a quick question around the Guardian Service and their recommendation around training around neurodivergency.
Yeah, we had that discussion with Simon, actually, and it was a new theme compared to what they've shared with us previously. So I know that there is work underway to incorporate neurodivergence training in a way that perhaps hasn't had the same focus historically, but it will be one that we want to come back to and review. I know it's one that's close to your heart, likewise mine. So we will look to report on that when there is a little bit more detail.
Can I ask a question that might be more for Jane or Ian than for the committee, but is sort of sparked by your report on the safe staffing? I'm hearing complaints from chairs of acute trusts, and whether these are real or perceived, I have no idea, and nor do I need to know. But that there is a tension between safer staffing and productivity in terms of money for price, and therefore that there's a continual demand for increasing staff ratios, and whether that is actually produced by an underlying safety need or whether that's produced by a need of certain bodies to protect themselves. Now, I say that neutrally without saying that that's right, but that's the message that we're getting. I'd just be interested in local reflections on that from the mental health and from the Oxleas perspective.
I'm happy to come in there. And I can't talk from an acute perspective, but I can talk from mental health and a community perspective, that our focus has always been on about having the right staff with the right skills in the right place. And our emphasis has been over the last year or so, very much thanks to Julie. I have to give her the credit for the work she's done on this. Is about ensuring that we've got the optimised rosters and that we have got real reliability and validity in terms of the assessments that we're doing. To the best of our knowledge, and I say this hand on heart, we are not gaming the system in terms of our staffing. We are trying to make sure that we've got the right staff who are really motivated to do the best they can within the teams. And we do know that this is incredibly difficult. We've also been focusing on making sure that we're upskilling staff to work to the top of their competence, but also to enable particularly nurses to create new roles and to work in advanced practice situations. So that is giving nurses particularly goals to aspire to. So we're not seeing particularly gaming of productivity, but if we have conversations with staff within the teams, and I know that from board visits this will be apparent, sometimes the perception on the ground is that there is a need for particular staff, and we do see some particular staff groups where we see absences of perhaps the optimal number of staff. So maybe we would like to see more OTs or psychologists, for example, within the interprofessional teams. I don't know whether Julie or Ian have any more to add to that.
Julie, do you want to?
Jane summarised it beautifully. The only other thing I would say is that there's some sort of, it's working a lot with the cultural side of actually we don't need more staff in order to be safer, because often there is that presumption we need more staff, otherwise we're not safe. But actually that's a bit of a myth, and so trying to work together with teams to think a bit more like what Jane said about the skill mix and training, etc.
And I think that the comments that I've been hearing from my colleagues have often been about sort of centrally, by central I mean Royal College administered ratios, which may or may not be useful, as I see neutrally. Nina.
So what's really interesting, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the most recent Safe Staffing report is the first time that I've seen reference in the report that you've produced to we're not convinced that the model hospital optimal staffing tool is actually giving us the right answer. So we just want to make sure that we're going to other sources to validate our staffing establishment and therefore whether it's safe or otherwise. So I do wonder whether if everybody else is forming that view based on the mHost data, whether there is a need to revisit that, because obviously things have changed quite significantly. I don't know how the mechanics of it works, but I was surprised that this time was the first time that Julie had said we do need to think about whether mHost is the right tool for establishing safe staffing.
Do you elaborate on that a bit?
The mHost is the mental health optimised staffing tool, so it's for mental health inpatient, and NHS England are going to update it in the next 18 months, 12 to 18 months they've promised. What we've done is we did a trial using for Meadowview, use the Safer Nursing Care tool for that population. So we've used that on Holbrook because we felt that the mHost didn't really attend to the frailty needs of the Holbrook population. So we've done that, and we're just doing data collection again now, and so we're going to compare. And part of the Safe Staffing exercise is about benchmarking with other trusts. So we've been benchmarking with SLAM and South West London, and particularly, but other trusts similar to ours as well, so that we can get an idea of what everyone else is doing.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Forgive me, I got the acronym wrong. It's not model hospital, it's mental health. Sorry, I knew that was going to happen.
Thank you. Neither.
This isn't necessarily about safe staffing, but I do see a tension between sort of staffing in what we want to achieve in terms of productivity and sort of other goals. So when I look back at board visits, some of the best teams appear to be ones who are really passionate. You know, they're driven a lot by compassion. Sometimes you have instances where people describe what they do. You know, they have patients who have complicated immigration status or other social issues, and they're getting involved, even though they don't really have a role, but they get involved because they care, right? They're motivated by that sort of compassion. You alluded to the challenge that our staff have when you have someone who doesn't meet a need but will be homeless in the cold. I mean, we want staff that care. We want staff that are driven by that compassion, and who sort of make time for that kindness. But that is a tension sometimes with being most efficient and the minimum level of staff you need for safety. So I think we should recognize that tension. It's not just about safety, it's also the staff that are able to go the extra mile. And I guess the tension we have is, you know, in the long run, are missing out in those extra interventions. And do they lower costs in the long run, or do they actually mean more people sicker later? And that's very hard to identify, but that is something that we should be concerned about.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's right. It's we got to hold that quality side of it as well. It's not a simple analysis. Okay, thank you, Damien. Audit and risk assurance.
Yes, so I chaired my first ARAC meeting with this organization on the 19th of November, and it's reassuring to see that I was invited back to another meeting. So thank you for having me today. I think the sort of impression or early observation I made at the previous board meeting was confirmed in the meeting, in the sense that all our governance processes work well, and that's especially the case for internal audit. We had received a good report on our readiness for emergencies, which I understand places Oxleas at a very high level compared with peers for that. The internal audit work is very much on track with a very short list, if there's anything at all on it, with delayed recommendations. And as I said earlier in the meeting, the committee intends to have a look at some of the top operational risks to try to bridge the gap between the top-down approach from the BAF and the bottom-up analysis coming back from the risk register. Finally, it isn't in the paper, but just to mention that a couple of days ago, we had what I thought was a useful, let's call it brainstorming session between the committee, the internal auditors, and a couple of executive team members. And the idea was effectively to put on the table what keeps non-exec directors awake at night to help build the internal audit plan for next year. So effectively, we provided in the meeting some raw material for the exec team to consider as the plan is built in the next few weeks with KPMG. And I thought that was useful to effectively give a voice to non-exec members of the committee at an early stage in the process.
Thank you. Any questions for Damien? Is there anything in this report that we actually have to approve in terms of the charitable trust fund committee, which is bundled into it, or the letter of representation? Do we have to approve anything there, or formally? I mean, I think it's fairly standard, but
I think so. Yes, we do. So we do need to. You can see that. You can see the papers attached just after the audit committee papers. So it's just simply taking some very high level. The position as at the end of 23-24, so it's quite some time along. The auditors have more or less agreed the position. They just really need the board to approve the the accounts have already been through the Business and Infrastructure Committee, and they've gone through. There's very little movement, I would say, on that. Key themes are already picked up on page, sorry, I'm having trouble reading that, page 164 is that, of the pack. So key themes are, we've got 26 trust funds, an opening balance of 451, a closing balance of 391, with 213 in the unrestricted pot and 178 in the restricted, which basically means there's the definition about what we can or cannot use those funds for, a cash balance of 409. It's just to confirm that these will not be consolidated into the trust accounts due to materiality, and we've had that conversation with the external auditors, and the Audit and Risk Committee went through all of this on the 17th of September. I believe we've also gone through the management letter, which is just really giving some assurance on this. So it's the process to effectively approve this at board prior to this being submitted at the end of January.
Thank you. Are people happy so to approve? You're getting a thumbs up and the answer is yes. So we have approved that. Thank you very much. And thank you, Damien, for your report. That's very helpful and very good to see that job being done on the bottom up, meeting the top down. I think that's really good to join that up, and I think that will give us better assurance than we already have, though that we're starting from a very strong place. I'm next up to present the Council of Governors report. I'll take that largely as read, except to note the things that directly affect the board, which is that the Council of Governors approved the appointment of Martin McRae to the Board of Directors, so he will be starting in due course, and the reappointment of Sophie and Jim to the board on the renewal. And also, while it's not in their gift, that Suzanne would be vice chair going forward. So just to congratulate those lucky people. And thank them for their service, and look forward to working with those who are renewing and with Martin when he starts with us. I think the other issues, I think you can see what the Council of Governors is concentrating on, and the bringing on of new governors, the induction of new governors, and then the various activities that they are going to do. And I must admit, I think that on a personal reflection, having met with some of the new governors in the as part of their induction and in the meeting, I think we've got a very good, vibrant set of governors who will, I think, add value to that body. Any questions? No, thank you. Okay. Today's meeting, but while we're coming up to lunchtime, hardly the time perhaps to ask this question, but any comments on today's meeting and the things that we could control, given that we couldn't control the fire alarm? I think what we will do is we'll make sure that we are briefed as to the protocols to do with fire alarms in the future, so that we avoid any confusion, because we probably should set the standard of how people should behave on these occasions. But any other comments that people might have on today's meeting?
Good meeting.
I think it was a high quality discussion, and I think we picked up that bit from the beginning of doing the day-to-day business, but also having a forward look, I think was, I'd commend people on that one. Okay, we have the forward agenda. I think that's probably to note. Has anyone got any other business for part A of the meeting? And in that case, I'd like to thank everybody who is watching in from afar onto our business, to thank everybody for their attendance. It's 1 o'clock, just after 1 o'clock now. So if we broke till 1:30, would that suit people? Okay, so we'll break till 1:30. We'll stop video streaming at the end of this sentence, and then we will meet again at 1:30, and that will be it. Thank you.